I've got my guest with me this morning, Johnathan Davidson. He's been here before. He's from Writing WM. He's their chief executive. We've been talking sport, and I've been finding out that he was really very disappointed when his team, Coventry City, left Highfield Road because it was a ground with such atmosphere, wasn't it?
It was, yes. I mean, we used to park our car in the same place every 2 weeks that it'd been parked for years and walk up through the terrace streets, and you'd gradually hear the sound of the crowd and you'd start to smell the beef burgers, and it would fill up, and there was a sense of excitement even just getting there. And then, of course, you know, like a lot of grounds in those days, it was fairly ramshackle. This stadium had been built at that time and the other one had been built 10 years later, and that one might have been falling down. But you felt that there was a sense of everybody knew where they were. It was homely, and the atmosphere was great. And of course, when I first started seeing them 20 years ago, I had the pleasure of watching them beat Chelsea and beat Manchester United sometimes, and beat Liverpool sometimes.
That shows how long ago it is.
It was a long time ago, yes. Yeah. So it's been a sad decline, and actually moving out of Highfield Road, there's a lot of hype about how wonderful it was going to be, and in the end, it's a fairly soulless stadium, I'm afraid. And of course, it's become more a rugby stadium now.
You see, that's the problem, isn't it? The marketeers say, "Oh, we can do this, we can do that, we can do the other," all very nice. But to a fan like yourself going to a game, there isn't any atmosphere there, is there?
No, and actually, as my brother-in-law pointed out, and I didn't know this, the home crowd is supposed to have their back to the centre of the town or city in which your club is based. So they are psychologically defending the centre of their city.
I didn't know this.
Well, this is what he tells me, and he's a man who knows about these things.
Yeah.
And when they built the Rico, they put the home crowd, the cop, as it were, in the opposite direction, so they weren't defending the centre of Coventry. From then on, it was just a matter of history, you can imagine. Now, I'm not sure if this is absolutely true, but it's quite an interesting idea that you would have your home crowd facing with their backs to the
Let us
city.
not spoil this, Johnathan. That is a great tale. And of course, you must have, I don't know whether you went yourself, but you must have talked to some supporters who made the trek to Northampton for that period of time. I mean, it was a disgrace, wasn't it?
It's just completely ludicrous. I mean, the idea that we had, a football ground standing empty and people were doing a round trip of 70 miles to stand on a hill in Northampton, of all places, it seemed madness. What was the reason for this? It wasn't about Coventry anymore. It was about spite and politics and business and all that kind of stuff, which football didn't start with that, did it? It started with people wanting to cheer on people who they knew were
the working man's game, of course.
Yes, especially the big cities like Coventry and Birmingham and so on. It was all about a social occasion and getting something out your system with a bit of shouting and a bit of jumping up and down, which we all like to do when Coventry score. Obviously not so frequently these days.
Has the Rico reeled you in to go and watch Wasps play rugby?
I haven't watched Wasps, mainly because rugby is a game full of confusion for me. And as you will know, Bob, I'm a fellow of slight figure, and the only time I played rugby at school, I managed to break my finger. So rugby's always felt a little, and not the sport I'd like to watch. I don't entirely understand it, but I know from working in the city, they have done a terrific job at making it into a family occasion, attracting a massive crowd, both from their core supporters from the south, but also a new crowd from around Coventry and Warwickshire and the West Midlands. And hats off to them. They've decided they're going to make it fun for people, they're going to make it enjoyable, they're going to make it friendly, and they've done that. So it's a shame for some of the other clubs in Coventry who've been slightly overshadowed, but at least the Rico's being used.
And of course, it's a bit like Milton Keynes Dons, which isn't that far down the M6, M1 from you, where they brought a club from Wimbledon. Now, you've got some people who set up their own AFC Wimbledon, this is what we're all about. But they did prove that you could move it, that people would still go there, and locals would go as well.
Yes, you want to watch a sports team where you can travel for 5 miles to go and see it, or a mile, or 2 miles, or 10 miles, not to have to travel 60 miles. So if you've got interesting sport, then people will come to it, absolutely. And the more sporting occasions you have in a city, the better. I like the sense of occasion you get on Saturdays. I mean, when I occasionally get a train on a Saturday in the season, and you've got all these fans crisscrossing the country, it's quite nice. I mean, you think, what a crazy waste of money. To some extent, on the other hand, they're making a little pilgrimage and they're having some fun and they're coming back happy or sad.
We'll talk writing with Johnathan later. It's time for a break. And of course, you've got the Birmingham Literature Festival coming up in October, haven't you? I mean, this is highlight time, isn't it?
It is for us, yes. It's a great moment to show off wonderful writers, both from the region and also from around the world. And in fact, this year we've we've really pushed the boat out, and we have writers coming from America, from Lithuania, from Latvia, and from various other countries to talk about their writing, which is something we've not really done before. And we're particularly pleased to have the American poet Rita Dove, who is an ex-American poet laureate, personal friend of Barack Obama, and she is coming over at our request, and she'll be giving a performance at the festival on the second day, on Friday the 9th. She's a wonderful speaker and performer.
How do you get somebody like that to come, because quite possibly she didn't know too much about writing West Midlands when you approached her?
There's a story there. I was in Nicaragua, as you are, about a year and a half ago at a poetry festival performing myself, and she was the guest poet. She's a very big name in Central America as well as in North America, and we got talking to her, and her husband Fred is German, and they are wonderful ballroom dancers. You wouldn't believe it. Every night in this Nicaraguan festival there was dancing. Obviously the English people sat on the edges hoping that they might shuffle on at some point, but Rita and Fred cut a rug. So we got talking to them, and afterwards I emailed her and said, would you like to come to Birmingham? She doesn't come to the UK very often. She goes to mainland Europe quite a lot, so it's quite a new thing for her, and for us it's quite exciting to spend a reasonable amount of resources to bring a writer over. She's also doing some lectures around the country with the Poetry Society through our work. So for us it's a new departure to bring somebody of that calibre over from America to Birmingham, and she's really looking forward to being in our region. She wants to find out about it, wants to drive around, wants to go to Stratford and look at the canals and look at other things that make the Midlands kind of interesting, because it's not a region a lot about in America. It's not famous like London's famous or like Liverpool might be. So we're looking forward to putting a right on a few things.
Did you say to her, look, when he was president, Bill Clinton was here and he had a pint in a pub somewhere in the centre of Birmingham, didn't he? So
yes, there is some form. Yes, yeah. No, she's very well disposed to the region, and just wants to meet other writers and so on. So in fact, that particular event, we've got Birmingham's Young Poet Laureate will also be performing, Serena Arthur. So it's a nice connection between a young poet from our region and a very established poet from North America.
I mean, how do you? I've always wondered. I mean, apart from obviously a love of words and all the rest of it, how you become a poet, because there's no template that says you do it like this. You could offer a template for most things, but you can't for poetry, can you?
No, there's no signing on fee. There's no course you can do which can guarantee you becoming a poet. You can do courses in creative writing, and they're wonderful. But if you're going to write great poetry at some point in your life, it's about sticking at it as a reader of poetry, as a writer of poetry. It's about feeling that you've got something interesting and unique to say. It's about feeling that writing poetry is something you need to do every day, perhaps, that's your form. I mean, for some people their form is presenting in various ways, their form is performing maybe, or their form is visual art or something. But for poets it's language, it's words, it's constantly being excited about what you can say if you compress language into small blocks of text, and also knowing that poetry, unlike other forms of literature, people can carry it with them in their heads, word for word, or they can carry it in their hearts when they're thinking about it. And as we know, people reach for poetry at times of stress in their lives. So actually you're doing a sort of public service sometimes by writing poetry.
When you're writing poetry, I mean, do you have sort of moments where words, phrases come into your mind? Is it like you wake up in the middle of the night and you have to scribble something down?
Well, my experience is that does happen very occasionally, and you're very pleased when that happens. What poets generally say is that inspiration comes after a lot of perspiration, but it may take an hour or so at your desk before something of real value starts to come down onto the paper. And the trick is knowing when those moments are happening and going with the flow to some extent.
So is that words that are coming in your direction, or is it the theme, or what?
For a lot of poets, it is just playing of language to see what happens. I suppose they're tapping into their subconscious, perhaps, and memories and things they've experienced and things they are experiencing. On other occasions, I do know poets who just set out to write almost kind of documentary poetry. They've decided they're going to write about a subject. They're going to try and frame it in a way that's going to be particularly memorable or humorous or interesting, and that's the direction in which they're taking. So it's both those approaches. I suppose what's most important is that you don't try and parody or pastiche somebody else, but you make sure you're using language that is natural for you.
And you can't kind of force it, can you? It's got to come naturally to you, I suspect.
No, that's true. I mean, people may remember being forced to write poetry at school occasionally, and for some people that was a joy, and for others it was a trauma. But really, you know, poetry is the sort of thing that needs to, if it doesn't come as naturally as the leaves on the trees, it shouldn't come at all, as John Keats said. That's my one John Keats quote for this morning. So, you know, he got it right, but it needs to be a natural thing. Although there's quite a lot of hard work. You'd be amazed at how much time it takes for a poet to add in a comma and then take it out again. An afternoon in both cases.
Yeah. When you live here, you're going to Warwick University to a young writers' summer school. And it's quite an age range, isn't it, that the youngsters who are going to be there?
It is, yes. It's the second year we've run it. It's 5 days for young people between the age of 12 and 19. We've got 25 young writers, and they're working each of those 5 days with 2 professional writers. And the aim is to give them a week of creative writing, a chance to work with other young people who love writing in different forms, and a chance to work with experienced writers and develop their talents.
How can you spot that sort of talent at 12? Is it like a young sports person? You can see they've just got that extra bit.
Yeah, you'd be astonished actually. There are some kids who just have a facility of writing. They just want to write, they can tell stories, they're articulate. They're not necessarily the ones who are loudest. You know, sometimes their writing is the way they channel quietly their interest in the wider world. They read a lot, perhaps. There's a whole range. The young people we're working with, you know, as I say, some are great talkers and very entertaining verbally, and others are just quietly working away. But there definitely is something you can see at 12, 13, 14. You can see it as a little spark of interest. And it's also reflected in the way they read. You know, they read broadly. They don't just read the books they're being encouraged to read through school. They're reading beyond that. They're picking up ideas from other places, and they're enjoying other people's writing as well. So it's it's great fun. I mean, it's a combination of long periods of absolute silence when everyone's writing away in the room, and then incredible noise when they're all talking about what they've written. So it's a lovely way for kids who are into writing to spend 5 days in the summer holidays.
You talked about the whole thing of writing poetry, and you write plays as well. Does that come easily to you? Again, do you have the idea of, well, I think this is the topic, and then work it from there?
Yes, actually, the plays I've written have been for BBC Radio, for Radio 4 and Radio 3. And I've often started with an idea, something I've come across, interesting historical fact. I started one play based on a railway accident in the steam age, and so I did a lot of research in how signal boxes worked and so on. And so I was looking at interesting esoteric subjects. I did another play about gliding. So in fact, myself and my radio producer went up in a glider with an instructor and experienced what it's like to fly a glider several thousand feet up in the sky. So I like those kind of strange, odd little experiences. And then you just hear you hear sort of voices really. You hear people's the way they speak, the accents they have, how they form their language, and that inspires you.
So if you're sitting on a train, do you eavesdrop on conversations?
I certainly do.
Pretend you're reading your paper when in actual fact you're thinking, hey.
No, I love the things. I love the things people say. You know, particularly in unguarded moments when they'll just offer you a little phrase which sounds perfectly ordinary to them, but kind of opens up. You might say opens up their backstory, give you a little view of what their life is like because they've said something about something. You know, about a tortoise or something, for instance. So you can get stuff from that.
It makes me wonder if somebody's been sitting at home listening to the radio and thinking, that sounds familiar. This is the man who's to blame. It's a never-ending process, creativity and writing. And I suppose at the same time you want to make sure that young people, the next generation of writers, are as inspired as you were and as others before you.
Yes, that's, I think, the most important work we do. We run 21 young writers groups around the region, from Stoke in the north down to Pershore in the south. So every month there are groups of young people working with professional writers, developing their interest in writing. We've been running those for around 5 or 6 years, and I'm fairly certain that in the next 20 or 30 years, some really wonderful writers will develop as a result, partly of being given that confidence and inspiration by these more experienced writers in our Saturday morning groups.
Has the internet changed the way that all happens and the way that they write, as opposed to actually going and looking in a library?
Well, young people, I think, still use libraries as places in which you can find a lot of useful information, either on the internet or on the shelves.
a place where it's a quiet place to write, a place where there are people who share your interest perhaps. But what we find is that actually, despite the internet, young people, like everybody, they like to meet each other. If they're interested in writing, they want to meet other writers, and they want to meet them face to face, really. So we have tried to run online projects, and they sometimes work quite well. But actually, running our regular groups where people come together on a Saturday morning for 2 hours to work with other writers, that's what people like. Because writing is about communicating, and actually the first form of communication is having a conversation with somebody, as we're having this morning. And from those conversations, everything else springs, I think.
And as you said, it also comes from eavesdropping other people's conversations.